So, Bulletstorm is the first game I really remember being excited for as a kid. As soon as I saw this image on the cover of Game Informer, I was hooked. I clearly remember, based on that image alone and maybe whatever article was in the actual magazine, trying to imagine what the game could potentially be like with my kid brain, and definitely pretending to be the guy on the cover a lot, who we'll soon find out is far from the best role model. Suffice it to say, I was excited. Despite this though, I don't recall playing the game until many years later, and now here I am, playing it again another many years later. So, was Bulletstorm worth getting worked up about, or is it just one of many lackluster FPS games spawned by the Xbox 360 and PS3 console generation? Let's check out some gameplay and talk about it. Bulletstorm was released in 2011, developed by People Can Fly and Epic Games, and published by EA. Before we get into the visuals and presentation, I should mention that I played the so-called Full Clip Edition, which came out in 2017, and seems to be a fairly straightforward visual enhancement. As far as the graphics are concerned, well, it's pretty obvious that Epic Games had something to do with this, considering it looks pretty much exactly like Gears of War. It's not a bad-looking game, it's just kinda derivative. Surprisingly, I found that the environments were really well done. There's definitely some Mad Max inspiration in some segments, but it's nothing too terribly blatant. There was a lot more environmental variety than I remembered, too. Not to mention some of the crazy-ass set pieces, which we'll talk about a little more later. I suppose if you can look past the Gears of War influence, it's not a bad-looking game for 2011. In fact, the more stylized vibe of these visuals works quite well considering the content of the game, which I'll get into now. Bulletstorm follows Grayson Hunt and his band of space pirates, which quickly devolves from a band to a duo as a result of Gray's shitty decisions. Right off the bat, it's revealed that Gray and his crew used to be highly respected Black Ops soldiers who would carry out assassination missions for a guy named General Serrano. Turns out, Serrano is actually a total dick and had Grayson's team executing innocent civilians when he told them they were killing horrible war criminals. The crew finds this out in the opening segment after a really cool set piece walking down a skyscraper, when they kill this guy and check his computer, which reveals that he wasn't a warlord, he was actually just a journalist. This sets into motion a chain of events that eventually leads to both Serrano and Gray crash landing on a ruined planet that was once home to some kind of resort, but is now home to a bunch of crazy guys who want you dead. Gray manages to save his friend Ishii, but his other two squad mates die soon after arriving on the planet. And Ishii is now half cyborg and as a result, kinda nuts. It's honestly a neat concept for a plot, and it's more complex than I remembered, as Gray and Ishii are somewhat reliant on Serrano to escape the planet, as he's the only person with the means to do so. Unfortunately, this neat concept is let down by the dialogue, which is, well, see for yourself.
Yeah? Go fuck yourself! You shitpiles give chase, I will kill your dicks!
What? What does that even mean? You're gonna kill my dick? Well, I'll kill your dick! How about that, huh?
Speaking of dick-killing parties.
Most sentences uttered by any of the characters sound as though they were composed by a group of middle schoolers whose parents just left for the day or something. And I understand that Gray isn't supposed to be a very likable guy or anything, but listening to these characters bicker endlessly just gets tiring. Like, I get it. You hate each other. Is one more fuck you or I'm gonna kill your dick really going to change anything? I know I'm complaining about the dialogue right now, but I honestly did find some of it kind of funny. Not in a charming way or a way that made me gain any appreciation for any of these characters, just in like a, wow, that's really stupid, but also kind of hilarious way. I don't know, maybe it's just some residual middle schooler that's yet to mature in me. I did read somewhere while I was looking for that Game Informer article that I showed at the beginning that this actually could have been a localization issue. Since People Can Fly is a Polish development studio, I read that they were actually shocked when they heard the English translation and how vulgar the dialogue was. I'm not sure to what extent things were changed, but this just makes more sense to me. It's also worth mentioning that in one of the last scenes of the game I had this glitch, at least I'm assuming it was a glitch, where instead of delivering some presumably heartfelt, dramatic speech, Gray just does all these hand motions and doesn't say anything. It was one of the strangest things I've ever experienced in a game. Like, he has to be saying something right here, but he just looks around silently like a jackass. Honestly though, it's probably better this way than with the intended dialogue. At least this got a laugh out of me. How about the gameplay though? With a name like Bulletstorm, you're probably expecting some seriously hectic action, some gruesome combat, and some awe-inspiring set pieces, and you'd be right. The most important detail and distinguishing feature of Bulletstorm's combat is the skill shot system, which incentivizes taking out your opponents in creative ways and rewards you with ammo refills and weapon upgrades for doing so. For example, killing an enemy by shooting them in the body will only yield 10 points, but shooting them in the neck or head gives you 25. Most of these kills require you to use the leash, a piece of equipment you get pretty much right at the start of the game, which essentially just yanks enemies off the ground and hurls them towards you, at which point you can either kick them into something or shoot them. The kick is another important feature, as most enemies can be sent flying with a single kick. Gray's legs must be made out of steel or some shit. The leash and kick are definitely the most unique feature of the game, and they're seriously fun to play around with. Most areas feature environmental hazards which are perfect for throwing your enemies into, like giant cacti, a bunch of rebar sticking out for some reason, electrical currents, explosives, giant Venus flytraps, and a whole heap of other stuff. Did I mention this game is gruesome? I'm pretty sure there's actually an option to turn off blood and gore, and I really regret not trying that out because I don't even understand how that could be possible. Point is though, there's a lot of creatively revolting ways to dispatch of your enemies here, and it's pretty fun to do so if I'm honest. Back to what I was saying earlier, each method of killing enemies will net you a certain amount of skill points, with the more creative and difficult ones usually giving you more points. Completionists will probably have a field day here, with elegant skill shots to unlock such as kill an enemy by shooting him in the ass, and shoot an enemy in the balls and kick or shoot his head off. I suppose the childish nature of the dialogue extended to this section as well. It's a lot of fun to try this out and see just how unique some of these kills can be. Weaponry is pretty simple in Bulletstorm. Bit ironic if you think about it. But that isn't necessarily a bad thing, as it allows for your leashing and kicking capabilities to really shine. You'll likely always have the basic assault rifle equipped, as it's the most versatile weapon and it's probably the best option if you're going for headshots. The shotgun is a lot of fun and will often send enemies flying if it doesn't immediately kill them. A personal favorite of mine is the flail gun, which shoots an explosive that wraps around enemies or obstacles and then explodes the next time you pull the trigger. This is particularly cool because it allows you to set up some cool takedowns if you strategize. Another standout for me is the aptly named Penetrator, which I am all but certain is another immature joke by the translation team. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't laugh the first time I saw that name pop up. This one shoots out a drill bit that can skewer multiple enemies at once. But ammo is a little harder to come by and costs substantially more skill points if you opt to buy it. There are a few other weapons to choose from, but nothing else really stood out to me. At least not to the extent of these ones. With the exception of the chain gun turret, which you can only use during specific sections, but is a lot of chaotic fun nonetheless. The only weapon I want to mention on account of it being damn near useless is the sniper rifle. There is just no reason to use this thing outside of like literally 2 sections in the entire game, maybe 3 if I'm generous. This is just not the kind of game where you'll want to sit back and pick off enemies from a distance. Like, imagine if instead of constantly running around in Doom Eternal or Serious Sam, you had the option to sit behind a rock and snipe everybody. No thanks. I mentioned earlier that you can also upgrade weapons with your skill points, but the upgrades are the same for every gun, and they aren't that special if I'm being honest. You can upgrade ammo capacity and also add a charge mode to each weapon. The ammo capacity upgrade is exactly what it sounds like, but the charge mode is slightly different for each gun. For most of the guns though, it just fires a much more powerful blast, and the ammo for it can only be replaced at the upgrade stations located throughout the game. And you can upgrade the ammo capacity of your charges for each gun as well. As weak as these upgrades may seem at first glance, it might honestly be for the best that this wasn't too in-depth, as I don't think that this is a game that necessarily lends itself to meticulous weapon upgrades or anything like that. Considering the abundance of options you have in combat to begin with, I think the simplicity of weapons works out in the long run.
As far as enemies are concerned, there's actually a much larger variety than I anticipated. Most of the opponents you'll find are hard to even classify as opponents, as you can just fling them around with your leash and kick their faces into your heart's content. But luckily, there are some other enemy types to break up that potential monotony. Some enemies, for instance, are too fast for you to hit with your leash or kick, so you have to rely more heavily on firearms to kill them. Others are resistant to gunfire, which means that the leash is the way to go. They don't look like they should be near and vulnerable to gunfire, considering they aren't even wearing a fucking shirt most of the time, but somehow they are. You'll also encounter a substantial amount of these mini-bosses throughout the game, which are basically like normal enemies with more health and bigger weapons. Nothing terribly interesting, but they can be a nice diversion on occasion, as you'll have to switch up your playstyle a bit during these encounters. Other than that, there's these things called burnouts that you encounter in later sections of the game. They really try to make you think these things will be some serious threat like the Flood from Halo or something, but they end up just being a watered-down version of the Lambent from Gears of War 3. Granted, they can overwhelm you fairly easily, as a shit ton of them will often run straight at you. All you have to do is shoot one of their orange spots though, and they're down. I'd say the combat overall is fairly fast-paced, but it's not quite on the same level as something like the Doom or Serious Sam games, but it is absolutely far removed from the methodical gameplay of the Tom Clancy library.
I definitely have to talk about some of the set pieces as well, as they're a big component of the relentless action in Bulletstorm.
Almost right out of the gate, you'll find yourself on some kind of tram system with a giant wheel rolling behind you as enemies shoot at you from other trams and helicopters come after you. Pretty wild, to say the least. Later on, you'll have the chance to take control of this giant dinosaur that has a shitload of guns on it for some reason and just demolish everything in your path. It's stuff like that that makes this feel like something akin to a crazy summer blockbuster or something, but better because you're the one controlling it. Overall, I had a fun time with the combat and gameplay in Bulletstorm. It's wacky and one note, to say the least, but it's pretty short, so it's not a big deal. If you don't mind a guy talking about how puckered his asshole is on occasion.
Pants are dry, but my ass is puckered with joy.
Or how much all of the characters hate each other. Seriously, they will not shut the fuck up about that.
That's about all I've got for Bulletstorm. I'd say I was right to be excited about it as a kid. It's a lot of hectic fun, and I'm sure I would have appreciated the countless wiener jokes as well. Unfortunately, probably not substantially more than I still do now. I can always appreciate a good wiener joke, or a bad one. But regardless, thanks for watching. The amount of support and viewership the channel has been receiving lately has been amazing. Like, seriously, mind-boggling, and I mean that in the best possible way. Literally, when I posted the last review, I was thanking everyone for 100 subscribers, and now we have almost 300. I really appreciate each and every one of you who have taken the time to check out the channel. And if you enjoyed this video and want to help out, subscribing would mean a lot to me, or leaving a like on the video. I've also really loved reading all of your comments, so please feel free to leave one in the comments of this video as well. Thanks again, everyone, and I'll see you when I see you. Bye.